Welcome back. My name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking. In the last video, we looked at SwiftfulUI, which is a framework, a library of just reusable SwiftUI components. In this video, we're going to look at SwiftfulRouting. So this is another framework that I made myself that I use in all of my apps because it saves me so much time. This package does all of the routing for me out of the box. I never have to worry about creating navigation stacks, navigation views, navigation links, sheet modifiers, full screen modifiers, alert modifiers, even presenting modals. All of that is done inside this framework. And in this video, we're going to look at how to use it, how to implement it into your app. Now, it goes without saying, just like I said in the last video, this is a third-party dependency that you're adding to your app. And you're going to use it for routing, which is basically the core structure of your app. So generally speaking, if you're using somebody else's routing framework, I would be very careful. I'd be a little tentative. Do some research, do some testing, and make sure it works. Obviously, I've tested this and I trust this. I'm covering this again because a bunch of subscribers are using this in their apps and they wanted me to cover it in more detail. It doesn't matter to me if you guys use this in your app. I don't get anything out of you using this package, but I think it's really going to help a lot of you guys out because it saves me so much time. So it must save somebody else time as well. I'm going to talk about the technicalities in the app a little bit more, but at a high level, this framework is like an all-in-one for your routing. The idea of this framework was back in UI kit days, we had programmatic routing. And the routing in a UI kit framework is quite different from routing in a SwiftUI framework. And in many ways, the UI kit version is actually easier to use because it is programmatic. And so the solution in this package is to basically take the SwiftUI code and make it work in the same way that the UI kit code would work programmatically. So I have some documentation on GitHub that you guys can read through as well. But in this video, we're really going to look at the implementation of how to get this going in our app. As you guys are going to see, there is a package that we're going to import, and we're going to go through all the different use cases of the package. The package does have tests, so if you want to go and check it out and make sure that it is working, I have written UI tests for the framework, and there's even a sample project which is linked on the GitHub that you can go and test the framework out yourself. But that's all from me. Again, use this at your own risk. Use it if you want to. I'm covering it because I've had a bunch of people use the framework, ask me to cover it, and now we are. So I love this. Again, it's called SwiftfulRouting. It's public on GitHub. Give it a star if you do like the framework. Give it a star on GitHub. That would be awesome. And without further ado, let's jump into Xcode and write some code. Welcome back, everybody. This is going to be a wild ride of a video here. I'm going to cover SwiftfulRouting, which is a routing framework that I have made. I use in all of my apps. I was very hesitant to cover this for a long time because I don't think people who are just building their first SwiftUI app should be relying on some sort of third-party routing framework. And I think it's important to know how routing works yourself, how to use the navigation view, navigation stack, and navigation link, how to use sheets and full screen covers and all of that. Because there's just a lot of code in SwiftUI that revolves around that. However, I myself got really tired of writing all that and put it in a package and made it super easy to use. And then I had a bunch of people, some people now waiting years for me to actually cover this on the channel. So for those of you who've been waiting, I'm sorry for taking so long, but we're going to dive into everything you need to know about SwiftfulRouting in this video. So on my GitHub is a package called SwiftfulRouting. It is a convenience framework for routing in SwiftUI applications. I have some logic here, data about how it actually works. Without going too into detail, the idea of the framework is to basically have programmatic routing in SwiftUI. So SwiftUI is declarative, not programmatic. And so the routing in UIKit versus SwiftUI has historically been very, very different because of the way the frameworks work. However, with this package, it basically enables us to write programmatic code, even though SwiftUI is declarative. So what actually happens is when you segue, all of the view modifiers are added automatically to the destination. You never have to worry about adding view modifiers like sheets and full screen covers anymore. It's handled by the framework. And then the framework is going to erase or make the final destinations generic so that when you're calling it, wherever you want the view to go. So it sounds a little confusing, but it's very, very easy to use in practice. I added some docs here. Let's start with the setup here. I'm going to copy the URL. Let's go back into our project here. Again, I'm in the Swiftful Thinking SPMs and SDKs project. Let's create a new group called Routing. I'm going to import the package. Let's go into the project, package dependencies. Let's add in SwiftfulRouting. Let's go 5 to less than 6.0. If you're watching this in the future, version 6.0 is going to have some big changes. Some things will break between these, and I'll probably have to do another video on version 6.0. But if you're going to follow along here, just make sure you're checking out 5 to less than 6.0. Make sure it's in our target here, SwiftfulRouting. And let's go ahead and start using this. I'm going to right click the folder, create a new file, SwiftUI view, SwiftfulRouting bootcamp. Let's click create, jump in here. Let's import SwiftfulRouting and let's write some code. All right. First and foremost, before we get into it, everything you need to know is in the README of this project. That's basically what I'm going to walk through for the rest of this project. Towards the end, I'm going to show you guys there's actually a sample project that if you're going to actually use this in your app, you should play around with the sample project for a little bit, just so that you get really familiar with how the routing works. Setup is basically import the package and then wrap your view, the starting view, in a router view. Seems pretty simple. So think of the router view the same way as you think of navigation stack or navigation view. Router view is adding a navigation stack for you. So in your app, you will never have to write navigation stack again. Instead, you just add in a router view and click enter. I'll talk about this router in a second, but let's leave it as an underscore for now. And then put your view in here. That's it. It's that easy. You're now in the hierarchy for Swiftful routing. So I'll usually do this somewhere towards the root of my view, somewhere maybe like in this file here, and just wrap it in a router view. So this under the hood is actually adding it into a navigation stack. So if I add in here a nav title, we can see that the titles actually appear because we're in a navigation stack automatically. We do not need to add our own navigation stack or navigation view to our view hierarchy. If I continue reading here, it says all child views have access to the router. So there's an environment for router, and this is very easy to use. So I'm adding the router view here, and then let's have another child view. So let's create a struct called my home view, body. Let's paste in the environment, and let's just make this our home view. So here we're going to say my home view, and I'll paste in text with the navigation title, home. So our home view is now loaded. And the thing that I absolutely love about the router is firstly, like this is such simple line of code, right? Everything you're going to need to do is within this router itself. And every single child of this router view is going to have access to a router in the environment. It's so easy to use. It could not be easier. I'm going to create a button here. Let's just put this as ClickMate. And let's do some action. So when we click this, maybe we want to go to the next screen. So all we need to do is call router.showScreen. And there's a bunch of completions here, and all you have to do is call router dot. And here you'll see all the completions, everything that you can access inside the router, which has grown a lot in the last couple of releases. So the main things here are showScreen. This is if you want to segue to a screen. showAlert, if you want to show like an alert or a confirmation dialog. And there's showModal if you want to put a modal on top of the current screen. Let's start with router.showScreen. I'm going to use this one. So there's three options: push, sheet, full screen cover. Let's push. And then again, I'm going to not use this router for a second. Let's make that an underscore. And let's go to a third screen. So let's say text. So let's create another screen here. Struct my third screen. It's a view. Every view has a body. And I'm going to copy this, put it down here. Let's call this screen 3. We don't need this code. And let's pass our router in down here as well. Here we're going to go to my third screen. All right. So this is all the code I need to segue to the next screen. I call router.push, and it goes to the next screen. Let's reload the preview real quick. Click, and it goes to third screen. So here now I don't have to worry about navigation links. I don't have to worry about navigation stack. What's really convenient is if I want to change this, instead of being a push, maybe I want to do like a .sheet. It's that simple, sheet, and we also have full screen cover. Awesome. If I now am on the third screen and I want to go backwards, all I need to do is call router.dismissScreen. So I can pop up to the third screen and then dismiss it. All right. One thing to note is that the router.showScreen also has onDismiss. So if you ever want to execute when those screens dismiss, you have a closure here for that. This is actually a feature that's not even in the native SwiftUI components. Like if you wanted an ondismiss of a navigation link, pretty difficult to figure out, but it's all embedded into the framework. So if we have an ondismiss, we can just add some code in here. This router.showScreen also has a completion for route. And the reason I've added this is so that it's really easy to pass a route around your app. So for example, if I wanted to inject like a route of type AnyRoute, I could add in here. Let's go and make this a push. Let's go to my third screen. And now I can pass in this route. I can pass this route around my application. And it works. Cool. Router also has showAlert. Alert. We can go to alert. Let's just say hi. And a button that says okay. I can show alert in 2 lines of code. There also is a .confirmation dialog. If I want to make a confirmation dialog down here, I can add maybe, I think there's like a subtitle. Subtitle pops up. I can add a bunch of buttons here. Another one. All my buttons come in here. And it's just making all this logic super easy for me to do in my apps. It also has showModal, which you can customize completely. I'm just going to do a show default modal, basic modal for now. And let's just put text that says hi. Modal pops above the current context. I'm going to talk more about modals in a second. Let's go back to the GitHub docs real quick. So all of child views have access to the router. So we've been using the @environment router, right? But we also can have the option to not use the environment router. So for complex app architectures, you might not want to perform all of your routing in the view layer. So the problem with the @environment is that you need to now do all of this routing inside the view, right? But what if I want to have a view model and then do the routing in the view model? So just for example's sake, we're going to try to do this now without the environment. So I'm going to comment this out, and I'm going to comment this router out here. And we can do it by passing the router directly into each view. So you'll notice these closures have a router that comes back. So I can actually just pass in the router to the view. We'll say let router of type AnyRouter. And now when I create my home view, I can just pass in the router directly. And I can do the same thing for this other third screen here when we pass in the router. So let's comment this out. Let's again, down here, we'll call router.showScreen for the route. And then in these closures, we also get that new router back. So we can pass in here a router. Let's click it and it works. Let's reload the canvas real quick. Let's click it and it works and it dismisses. Awesome. So I think this is underrated how incredibly awesome this is to pass the router directly, because you can do some really crazy stuff from your call sites. So for example, let's just say I'm not going to my home view, right? Instead, let's just write some code in here. Let's say text view 2. Let's call this view 1. And then on tap gesture, let's say router.showScreen. Let's go push. And let's call this router a new router 2. Let's add a text view 2. Let's add an on tap gesture. Router 2.showScreen. ShowScreen. Push. Destination. This will be router 3. I don't need to call it router 3. I can call it router, but I'm just trying to make this clear for you guys. Let's do a text. View 3. Let's do on tap gesture. Router, showScreen. Push. router 4. Text, view 4. On tap gesture, router 4. Dismiss screen. Now, this is all the code that I have in my app right now, but watch this. View 1, view 2, view 3, view 4. Like, this is so much logic behind the scenes. I think this is incredibly powerful. We can change these if we want sheets, we want full screen covers, right? We got all this crazy stuff, just a couple lines of code. And this should be, sorry, it looks like it bugged out. This should actually be router. Let's make sure the routers are correct here. So this one's going to access this router, router 2, router 3, router 4. Right? So now I have sheet, full screen cover, push. Let's go sheet, full screen cover, push, dismiss, right? Just a lot of really customization that we can do here by just passing the router directly from view to view. This also is going to open you up if you're using like MVVM. You can do the routing now in your view model. So for example, my home view, let's pretend like I used MVVM. Maybe I have a final class called my home view model, observable object, open the brackets, and then inside my home view model, I'll pass in that router. So let's create an initializer here. So now in my view model, I can do the routing. So I can say func go to next screen. So in my actual view now, create a state object var view model. We'll set it equal to a my home view model. We'll make it of type my home view model actually. So now we will inject this when we create the view. And here, and in my view, rather than having to do the routing from the view, I can now call viewModel.go to next screen. And so when I create my home view, let's comment all this out. Let's get my home view back. And when I create my view model, I can pass in the router. So now in my view model, I can handle all of my routing logic. Router show screen, push. This is the new router. We'll say my third view, my third screen of a router. Now I'm using MVVM, just 2 lines of code, and I'm using MVVM to do the routing in my view model. This also works for Viper and basically anything because you can just move past this router around your app with ease. Before we wrap up this video, I'm just going to run through the documentation here real quick. Wrap your view in a router view. Then you can use the router from the environment, or you can pass that router directly. Router has showScreen, it has showAlert, it has showModal. There's a little bit of logic here if you're using it in an existing project. So if you have a project where you already have a navigation stack, well, we don't want to add a second one. So when you create your router view, just set that to false. Or if you have a navigation stack where you have screens on the path already, so if you have a navigation stack in your app where you have a bunch of screens that are binding to this path, you can then just further bind that path to the router view. So it works out of the box for existing apps as well. Show screens is what I showed you guys. There's push, sheet, full screen cover. You can also use AnyRoute. I would recommend going through these docs on your own. If you're using iOS 16 Plus, a navigation stack also supports pushing more than one screen at once. So for example, down here, I can call here router.pushScreenStack. So this is an array of push route. So what this is basically if I want to perform multiple segues at once and they're all going to be a push. So I'm just going to copy this code here. Let's say route 1, 2, and 3. Let's just copy all this code, put it here. So if I click this, it's going to push all 3 of these onto the stack at once and land me on the third one. So here we go, view 3. Now if I click back, I can go back to view 2, back to view 1, and then back to the home screen. So incredibly easy to push a bunch of views on the stack at once as well. And if I want to dismiss all of those screens, let's just here on tap gesture, I'll access that router and I'll call just dismissScreenStack. So we'll dismiss all the screens that are pushed onto the stack. So if I go to view 3 and then I dismiss, it goes all the way back to the home screen. It's basically a pop to root if you guys are coming from UIKit. It also supports resizable sheets. So if you want that sheet to be like draggable between different sizes, or if you want to open up Safari. Before we move on to go through the rest of this, I'm going to actually show you guys the example project that I have. So if you guys come up here, there's a example project that I would recommend you guys to download and start using. So this is what the project looks like, routing example. And all this is, I'm creating a router view like we just did, and then I have one child view here. And the thing with this sample project is that I've added basically all of the methods into one list here. So this way you guys can play around with all of these actions. So I have my view here, and then when you run this, let's build it to a simulator, you'll be able to see basically how everything works. So we just went through a bunch of the segues. So push is pushing forward. We have sheets. We have full screen covers. Let's dismiss that. Resizable sheet, if you want it to be draggable and resizable. Programmatic, so you can change it automatically by clicking buttons, as well as Safari if you want to open up Safari. A lot of stuff we just covered, but you guys in this project can see all of the code on how it works. So I think it's going to really help you out if you decide to use this in your apps. We've already talked about alerts a little bit, so just some examples in here, how to get these to work. There's a convenience show basic alert. It's just a basic error alert here, or confirmation dialog. Modal examples. This is great. If you're going to add modals to your app here, I would say just check out some of the sample code here, because there's a lot of different ways to configure this. So for example, here's a basic modal. Here's animating the opacity with a background. Modal from the top, modal from the top, modal from the bottom, a modal from the bottom, another one from the leading edge, one from the trailing edge. So, and then scaling in. So a lot of customization, like this is just some of the examples that you guys can do with these modals. The modals are different from the segues because you're not actually changing the current screen. You're just displaying something on top of it, but they are super convenient. And then at the bottom here, I just have some data. If you wanted to use MVVM or Viper in your apps with this framework, I've added code here just with some examples of basic MVVM, a more complex MVVM, and then a mock Viper implementation as well. The last thing I want to talk to you guys about is the one thing that I've been skipping over in this so far, which is enterScreenFlows. This is a new way to perform routing in your application. Before we get into this, I want to say that I've kind of basically created this over the last couple of years. I don't see many people doing this. If you guys are trying to build something really complex where you have a lot of different flows in your app, this is a lifesaver. So the reason I basically created this was because sometimes in my app, when I'm at a call site, so for example, let's just go back to our sample project real quick. For example, if I was in this function, maybe I have like an A/B test in my app, and depending on the A/B test, I want to change which screens this user is going to see. Well, if you're traditionally building SwiftUI, you would have to go into each of those child views and change the logic. So when they click a button in view A, you would have to then go and figure out which view is next. When they click a button in view B, you would have to add if-else logic. So the idea here is when I'm in this single call site in my app, I can customize all of the future routes, not just the next one. So for example, let's enter a screen flow. I'm going to comment this out, and let's call here router.enterScreenFlow. And let's call it route 1. And these are going to be AnyRoute. So I'm going to actually take these and make these all AnyRoute. This one will be dot full screen cover. So AnyRoute is the same thing as pushRoute, except you can customize the segue. And that's just because the push stack only works for pushes. So AnyRoute, full screen cover, AnyRoute, let's call .push. And I'll copy that. I'll paste this one here as well. And let's just change this to route 1, route 2, route 3. All right, now if I go and click me, we enter the screen flow. So we can see a full screen cover pops up with view 1. And then the magic of this screen flow is that it understands that the route 2 and 3 are in the, think about it as like a music queue. These routes are in the queue. And then when you're ready to segue from view 1 to view 2, you don't actually need to say, go to this screen. Instead, you say, go to next screen. Again, I want to iterate, most developers are never going to need this feature and should not worry about this. But if I'm on view 1 and I want to go to the next view in the route, I'll just add an on tap gesture. And instead of saying router.showScreen and trying to say like, here's a specific screen that I want to go to, I'm just going to say router.showNextScreen. So it's going to try to find a screen in the queue and then go to that one. And it throws, so we'll just make it optional try for now. Click me, and now go to next screen should know the next screen is view 2. And it goes to view 2. And let's add the same thing here as well. And let's add the same thing here as well. I'm going to comment this out, this here. So click me, view 1, view 2, view 3. And now when I click it, view 3, it's going to throw an error because there is no next screen. So traditional logic that I put in my app here is like a do catch. And if there is no next screen, I can call router.dismiss. I can dismiss the screen maybe. So here I can go view 1, view 2, view 3. If I can dismiss the screen, that's dismissing back one screen. So I'll go back to view 2. If I instead dismissScreenStack, I now go view 1, view 2, view 3. And ScreenStack is going to dismiss all of the pushes on this stack. So this was a push and this was a push, but this was not. So it should bring us back to view 1. Or I could say dismiss environment. So in SwiftUI, there are environments. Environments are basically any sheet or any full screen cover. So if I open up and click enter this screen flow, I enter a new environment when I open this sheet. If any child view of this sheet or full screen cover calls dismiss environment, it's going to find the last sheet or full screen cover and dismiss that, which will then dismiss everything on top. So if I go here and I go back to view 3, if I dismiss the environment now, it's going to dismiss this full screen cover, which dismisses all of this. And now we're back to our home view. So the reason this is really handy is because when I'm building these views now, I no longer ever add any logic into the routing. The entire routing logic of my screen is router show next screen, or otherwise router dismiss environment. And there's a convenience method here, is just router.show next screen or dismiss environment. So this is going to take some time to get used to working with this, but just imagine here when you're building screen 1, screen 2, screen 3, if it's always going to some next screen and you've already set up some sort of screen flow, then you just need to say show next screen and you never have to worry about the actual screen it's going to go to. This really helps with like complex A/B tests if you guys get there. Again, this is not for basic apps. This is not for beginners, but this is really cool if you have a lot of complex data flows in your app. I've written some logic here about how it works and the reasons to actually use a flow. But all in all, that is it for SwiftfulRouting. The idea here is to simplify as much as possible all of the routing logic in your apps and basically do it all in just one struct. I would say here, what's really cool is if you look at the RouterView under the hood, RouterView is just basically a struct. It's actually RouterView internal inside the framework. And I'm literally just using some states and bindings. And the logic in here is complex, but this is the entire framework. It is a native SwiftUI solution to routing, and it's returning you back any router. Which I do want to actually highlight is that when we are pulling the router from the environment, like down here, you'll notice this is at environment and not an environment object. And that's because I don't have any sort of external reliance on observable objects or Combine or anything. This entire framework is straight up SwiftUI, and I think that's probably why it works so well. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I would definitely say check out the sample project if you are thinking about using this in your app. Don't worry about screen flows too much until you get more advanced with this framework. But don't forget to hit the start button if you like this framework. It has taken me a long time to create this. It is very, very complex under the hood. Basically a lot of custom bindings and custom view modifiers. But overall, the package right now is stable and I'm using it in production all the time, every day. And as you saw, it's just a couple lines of code to segue to any screen, which saves me so much time and headache as a SwiftUI developer. I really can't explain how underrated I think this framework is. It's doing so much under the hood. We no longer need to add navigation view or navigation stack. We no longer need to add navigation link. We no longer need to add .sheet or .alert. All of that is done under the hood inside the RouterView. Those of you who've been waiting for this, I hope this was a good summary of the framework. Version 6.0 is in beta if you guys want to try it out. I will do another video when 6.0 gets released, probably not for a couple months, but that's going to be a big update where we have more transitions and module support. So you can have multiple modules in your app. Think like onboarding module, core module, and also support for multiple modals. So right now the framework only supports one modal at a time, but in this next update, it's probably going to support infinite modals at a time. So you can display a whole bunch on top of each other. Really cool stuff. Check out 5.1.0 if you're going to follow this video and let me know what you guys think. Thank you guys for watching. As always, my name is Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking, and I'll see you in the next video.